Well, it was a science in the ancient times. It's just that it had sort of disappeared and only fragments were left. And actually, I started some experiments in the lab that were some of those fragments, but taught within the system. They were fragments that exist in other systems. But the huge ancient technology of the mind was the knowledge that had come from thousands and thousands and thousands of years of experimentation by the people called the rishis, the people of power. This was before the advent of any of the formal religions, before Hinduism, etc. And the rishis had worked really for thousands of years and devised these techniques through experiment. So it's because they had that awareness, they had that sensitivity, and then they found out how to make the system much more operational, so to speak. So the mysteries of the brain were solved. And that what those techniques are techniques to stimulate certain areas, etc., or treat different psychiatric disorders. That's really the focus of my work in the last 20 plus years, is for treating psychiatric disorders. So I now have 4 books published, but 3 of them have at least 100 different meditation techniques, and most of them are for different psychiatric disorders. The things that we call bipolar disorder, or the addictions, or depression, etc., were not foreign to ancient times. They existed thousands from the beginning of man. You know, depression and anxiety aren't something that's new. Post-traumatic stress disorder is a new label, but you know, the syndrome developed probably within the very first group of people on the planet. But so the yogis had devised techniques through experimentation. Now let me give you a little bit of background on my work. You know, we have this nose, and we really don't know much about it. In fact, there's something called the nasal cycle, that when you have a cold, you're well aware that usually one nostril is completely plugged, and you can breathe through the other one when you try and blow your nose. So you become aware of this kind of congestion and decongestion difference in the 2 nostrils. But that's under normal circumstances. When somebody doesn't have a cold, that rhythm is changing back and forth anyways. One side's congested, the other side's not congested. And then it reverses, back and forth, back and forth. In the Western science, they understood this phenomena from about 1895. They called it the nasal cycle. And what it really is a marker for the autonomic and central nervous system. That not only is the autonomic tone in the periphery on the 2 sides switching back and forth like yin and yang, but it's a marker for how the 2 hemispheres of the brain, the right and left hemispheres, alternate in dominance. And that was the first experiment I went into the laboratory to do. We used EEG and continuous monitoring of differential airflow in the nostrils and naive subjects, and we showed that when somebody's primarily breathing through the right nostril, there's greater activity in the left hemisphere. And when they're breathing more through the left nostril, there's greater activity in the right hemisphere. And we started to study that with other methods, and other people started to study it, and we looked at it during sleep, and we showed that you know, this ancient phenomenology that yogis knew about was in fact very real and fascinating. I mean, very few people, even in the fields of the neurosciences today, know about the rhythm of the 2 hemispheres, how they alternate in dominance. And that's an incredibly fascinating and important phenomenon. It's probably the most interesting rhythm that we exhibit, you know, during the waking hours or even during the sleeping hours, because REM and non-REM sleep are coupled to that rhythm. In fact, all of the systems of the body are coupled to it. The cardiovascular system has its ultradian rhythms. The immune system has its ultradian rhythms. All of our desires wax and wane with that ultradian rhythm. And in addition to it being a marker that can tell us about our mind-body states, that if you force breathe through the right nostril, you'll stimulate primarily the left hemisphere, and vice versa. If you force breathe through the left nostril, you'll stimulate the right hemisphere. And we've shown that with EEG, we've shown it with magnetoencephalography, we've shown differential effects on heart rate, Right nostril breathing increases heart rate, left nostril breathing reduces it. It has an effect on everything that's related to autonomic activity, whether it's eye blinks or intraocular pressure or blood pressures and things like that. And yogis knew about that. They knew that it was the hypothalamus, the brain's brain, that in fact is regulating this autonomic rhythm that has such a profound influence on the central nervous system. They're coupled, they're tightly coupled. So that's some of the work that I did, that gives this, the teachings of yoga more reliable title as ancient science, because we just translated it, or we did the experiments and we reproved what yogis knew in ancient times. So there's thousands of techniques that really need to be studied. We're studying some of them with whole head magnetoencephalography. In fact, one of the techniques we're looking at is a left nostril breathing technique that is specific for treating obsessive compulsive disorders, which I'm probably best known for. I've done 3 clinical trials. All 3 of them were extremely successful. Only 2 of them are published at the moment because we just finished one and I have to start writing it up. But one can use science, but that doesn't mean that one should wait on it infinitely to get grants and do the studies, etc. And the knowledge needs to be brought out. I mean, there was a technique that I learned from Yogi Bhajan in 1974, 75 that's specific for treating addictions. Regardless of what kind of addictions people have. So there's a brain center. And the addictive disorders are probably the most troublesome for our society, the most costly and the most devastating. And it's a pervasive. I mean, it doesn't matter whether you have an alcoholic addiction or addiction to alcohol or all the various kinds of drugs or an addictive personality with other things. We're habit-forming creatures by nature, but it's the kinds of habits that we have that are either positive or negative. And so there's a great knowledge that needs to be rediscovered, or at least we need to bring attention to it and awareness so that people can experiment with it.